In August 2011, lines formed outside American big box retailers for a clearance event that marked the end of an empire. Hewlett-Packard was liquidating its touchpad tablets for just $99. The devices ran WebOS, an operating system designed to defeat the iPhone. Instead, it survived exactly 49 days on the retail shelf before HP canceled the hardware entirely. This fire sale was not just a corporate miscalculation. It was the final, desperate breath of Palm. A decade earlier, Palm had built the definitive American pocket computer, teaching millions of professionals to carry their digital lives in a shirt pocket. When HP abandoned the platform, developers lost a beautifully designed ecosystem, and a brand that once defined the future became dead inventory overnight. The paradox is that Palm did not disappear because America stopped wanting mobile technology. It collapsed because the market weaponized the very habits Palm created. The pioneer of the pocket screen could not survive the smartphone era it helped inspire. But the real story of Palm is not only the story of a fire sale, it is the story of how America first learned to put the future in its pocket. Every week, we tell the stories of American devices, platforms, software, and screens that once taught the country what the future felt like, and what happened when the market moved on. Subscribe if that history matters to you. The story begins not with nostalgia, but with a specific place inside a Silicon Valley garage in 1996. The story of the American pocket computer does not begin with a line of code, a circuit board, or a massive venture capital presentation. It begins with a piece of mahogany wood. In the early 1990s, the personal computer, a machine designed for one person to use directly at a desk, had already conquered the American office. But the moment a professional stepped away from their cubicle, the digital revolution abruptly stopped. To navigate a business trip, a meeting, or a daily commute, Americans relied on thick, leather-bound daytimer planners, bloated Rolodexes, and briefcases heavy with printed memos. The brain of the American workforce was still trapped on paper. Silicon Valley knew a mobile device was the next frontier. In 1993, Apple launched the Newton Message Pad, a highly anticipated PDA, a personal digital assistant designed to handle contacts, calendars, and notes on the go. But the Newton was a beautiful miscalculation. It was expensive, famously unreliable at reading handwriting, and crucially, it was too large. It tried to squeeze the complex capabilities of a full desktop into a heavy plastic slab. It did not fit in a pocket. It required a briefcase. Jeff Hawkins, a computing engineer and the founder of Palm Computing, watched the Newton stumble and realized the entire industry was trying to solve the wrong problem. A handheld device did not need to replace the desktop computer. It needed to be a fast, cheap, and lightweight extension of it. And before any software could be written, it had to pass a strict physical test. It had to slide effortlessly into a standard American dress shirt pocket. To prove this, Hawkins did not start by soldering a prototype. He went into his garage, cut a block of mahogany wood to his exact desired dimensions, and printed out a paper mock-up of a screen. He taped the paper interface to the wood and placed it in his pocket. For months, Hawkins carried this block of wood everywhere he traveled. If he was in a meeting and someone asked to schedule a lunch, he would pull out the wood block, hold a sawed-off chopstick like a stylus, a pen-like tool used to tap digital screens, and pretend to write on the paper. He was testing an American user habit before the technology even existed. The woodblock was a radical argument against Silicon Valley's obsession with hardware specifications. Hawkins proved that a user did not want a powerful, complex computer in their pocket if it was heavy and slow to operate. They wanted a device that turned on instantly, found a phone number in 3 seconds, and vanished back into a shirt pocket without ruining the fabric. The dimensions were the product. But having the right physical dimensions was only half the battle. Hawkins, along with co-founders Donna Dubinsky and Ed Colligan, had to navigate a tech industry that was hostile to simple ideas. Venture capitalists wanted handheld computers with color screens, cellular modems, and heavy operating systems. Palm actively refused. They understood a fundamental truth about the mid-90s tech market. An American professional did not want to learn a completely new, complicated computing ecosystem on the train. They just wanted their Microsoft Windows calendar in their pocket. To get the device manufactured at scale, Palm made a pragmatic sacrifice. In 1995, they sold the startup to U.S. Robotics, an American hardware giant famous for building the modems that were rapidly connecting households to the internet. With U.S. Robotics providing the manufacturing muscle and retail distribution channels, Palm was finally ready to face the consumer. In March 1996, the Pilot 1000 arrived on American retail shelves. If a consumer walked into a CompUSA or a Circuit City that spring, the box sat proudly in the software and peripherals aisle, priced at $299. It did not look like a revolutionary piece of computing. When a buyer opened the packaging, they found a gray plastic slab that felt dense but comfortably light. It had a tiny, unlit monochrome screen. It contained only 128 kilobytes of memory. Fast temporary storage a computer uses while programs are running. Today, that is barely enough to hold a single low-resolution photograph. But in 1996, that 128 kilobytes could store 500 contacts, 600 appointments, and 100 notes. More importantly, the Pilot 1000 ran on two standard AAA batteries. While early Apple Newton users were constantly hunting for wall chargers or dealing with dead devices mid-meeting, a Palm user could buy a pack of batteries at a mall kiosk and keep the device running for months. Below the screen sat a row of physical plastic buttons, each dedicated to a specific task: a date book, a phone book, a to-do list, and a memo pad. Pressing any button turned the machine on instantly. There was no boot sequence, no waiting for a hard drive to spin up. In an era where a desktop computer could take 3 minutes to load Windows 95, the Pilot 1000 offered immediate, frictionless access. The retail strategy worked. The industry trade press, which had mocked previous handhelds as overpriced toys, was stunned by Palm's restraint. The company had ignored the urge to pack the device with complex battery-draining features. It could not send an email. It could not browse the web. It was entirely a digital island. By focusing strictly on organizing time and contacts, Palm bypassed the technological bottlenecks that had destroyed their competitors. Professionals who had ignored PDAs began picking up the Pilot 1000 in massive numbers. It was cheap enough to be an impulse buy for a mid-level manager, and simple enough that it did not require a call to a corporate IT department to set up. It was not threatening the desktop computer. It was entirely subservient to it. Within months, it became a staple in airport lounges, office meeting rooms, and commuter trains across the country. The device fit perfectly in an American shirt pocket, but it still needed to prove it belonged in an American life. The Pilot 1000 had the right size and the right battery life, but a pocket device is entirely useless if an American professional cannot quickly put information into it. In 1996, mobile data entry was a massive engineering bottleneck. Apple's Newton had attempted to read natural human handwriting, a process that required massive computing power and famously resulted in frustrating, inaccurate translations. Miniature physical keyboards added too much bulk and weight to a device meant for a shirt pocket. Palm recognized that a small, cheap processor, the main chip that performs calculations and executes instructions, could never perfectly understand how a human being naturally writes. So Palm reversed the dynamic. Instead of forcing the computer to learn the human, they forced the human to learn the computer. They introduced graffiti. Graffiti was a custom, simplified alphabet designed specifically for the Palm Pilot. Users wrote on a small, dedicated square at the bottom of the touchscreen using a plastic stylus. But instead of writing a standard letter A user drew an upside-down V. A T was just a horizontal line crossed with a vertical drop, minus the time taken to lift the pen. It was a digital shorthand, stripped of complex curves, designed so the device's modest processor could recognize the input with near-perfect accuracy. This was a massive risk. American consumers historically reject technology that requires them to learn a new physical habit. But Palm included a small printed card in the box, a cheat sheet for the graffiti alphabet, and trusted that the payoff would be worth the friction. The gamble paid off brilliantly. Within a week of practice, an office worker could write up to 30 words a minute on a piece of glass without looking down. On commuter trains heading into Chicago, or in the waiting areas of United Airlines terminal gates, businessmen could be seen furiously tapping and swooping their styluses, fluently writing in an alphabet that only their device understood. But graffiti only solved the problem of input. It did not solve the problem of storage. The true breakthrough of the PalmPilot, the mechanism that turned it from a novel gadget into an indispensable American ecosystem, was a gray plastic dock called the Cradle. In the mid-1990s, the American personal computer, a machine designed for one person to use directly, usually at a desk or in a home, was the absolute center of digital life. Palm did not try to replace the PC. They designed the Pilot to be its loyal satellite. When a user bought a PalmPilot at CompUSA or Fry's Electronics, the box included a cradle with a thick cable that plugged directly into a serial port, a physical connection on the back of early desktop computers used to transfer data piece by piece. The user installed Palm's desktop software on their Windows 95 machine. Then, they placed the pocket computer into the cradle and pressed a single, physical button on the front of the dock. This initiated HotSync. HotSync was a proprietary software protocol that compared the data on the desktop with the data on the handheld device, automatically resolving conflicts and mirroring the information across both systems. Today, cloud synchronization is invisible and constant, happening over the air without a second thought. But in 1996, data transfer was physical, intentional, and highly visible. The HotSync ritual became one of the defining physical interactions of the late 90s tech boom. An executive would return to their cubicle, drop the device into the cradle, press the button, and watch a progress bar fill on their CRT monitor. When the process finished, the PC would emit a distinct, sharp beep. That sound was not just an audio cue, it was an emotional guarantee. It meant that every new phone number, every rescheduled meeting, and every random thought jotted down on a taxi ride had been safely rescued from the fragile pocket device and permanently archived on the family or corporate hard drive. Because the HotSync process was so reliable, it bypassed the traditional gatekeepers of American business technology. Historically, if a worker wanted a new computer or software platform, it had to be approved, purchased, and installed by a corporate IT department. But the PalmPilot was cheap enough to be bought with a personal credit card at an Office Depot on a Sunday afternoon. Because it did not require complex network configurations, it simply plugged into the back of a PC. Workers brought them into the office and set them up themselves. By the time the upgraded PalmPilot Professional launched in 1997, the device was quietly taking over the American workforce from the bottom up. Wall Street traders used them to track financial contacts. Doctors began carrying them in hospital corridors to replace messy paper shift schedules. The device was so widely adopted that the term Palm became a generic trademark, like Kleenex or Xerox. People did not say they were buying a personal digital assistant. They said they were buying a Palm. Palm had successfully bridged the gap between the heavy beige tower on the office desk and the dynamic, moving reality of the American workday. They had conquered the shirt pocket. With the data successfully synced and the physical habit established, the PalmPilot ceased to be just a digital notepad. It was about to become the center of the American professionals' world. By the spring of 1999, the Palm brand did not just dominate the American handheld market. It effectively was the market. But the company's true cultural peak arrived with a piece of hardware that fundamentally changed how American consumer electronics were perceived. It was the Palm 5. Before the Palm 5, handheld computers were utilitarian objects. They were thick, molded from heavy gray or black plastic, and designed strictly for function over form. The Palm 5 discarded that legacy entirely. It was wrapped in an anodized aluminum shell, a lightweight, durable metal that gave the device a cold, premium feel. It was impossibly thin, roughly the size of a small stack of index cards, and featured a rechargeable lithium-ion battery that drew power directly from the hot sink cradle. It was the first time an American technology company successfully pitched a pocket computer not just as a productivity tool, but as executive jewelry. The device became an immediate status symbol. In the first-class cabins of American Airlines flights and the departure lounges of JFK International Airport, business travelers pulled the metallic slabs from their suit pockets. It was heavily covered by the Wall Street Journal and became a staple in corporate boardrooms across Manhattan. The Palm Vi proved that American consumers were willing to pay a premium for technology that felt physically beautiful. In an American office or hospital where the desktop computer once held all the power, the right pocket device, Duratian, did not merely run software. It decided who had the information first, who could make decisions on the fly, and who felt that the future had finally arrived. But the beautiful aluminum hardware was only the vessel. The true gravity of the Palm empire in the late 1990s was the explosive growth of its software ecosystem, the network of hardware, software, users, developers, and accessories that make a platform valuable. Before the iPhone normalized the concept of a digital storefront, Palm accidentally created the first massive mobile app economy. An app, a software application designed for a mobile device, was not yet something you tapped a single icon to buy. In 1999, downloading a Palm app required an American user to go online using their desktop PC, browse independent software directories like Palm Gear, download a file to their hard drive, and use the hot sink cradle to push that software onto their pocket screen. Despite this friction, the developer community embraced the Palm OS with a fervor that Silicon Valley had not seen since the early days of the Apple II. Thousands of independent programmers, seeing millions of Palm devices in American pockets, began writing custom software. If a user walked into a CompUSA or a Fry's Electronics at the turn of the millennium, they would find entire retail aisles dedicated solely to boxed Palm software and accessories. There were financial calculators for accountants, real estate databases for brokers, and early digital games that commuters played on the subway. Nowhere was this software revolution more dramatic than in American medicine. A software startup called Hippocrates developed a comprehensive pharmacology database for the Palm OS. Instead of carrying heavy printed reference books in their white coats, doctors and medical students at institutions like Johns Hopkins and Harvard Medical School began carrying Palm devices. They could instantly cross-reference drug interactions at a patient's bedside. The pocket computer was no longer just organizing schedules. It was actively assisting in American healthcare. Palm had achieved the ultimate Silicon Valley dream. They had built a platform that other people were desperate to build upon, cementing the device into the daily habits of millions. By early 2000, Palm did not just lead the American handheld market. It suffocated the competition. For years, Microsoft had desperately tried to conquer the pocket with Windows CE, a miniature operating system that attempted to cram the iconic Start menu, desktop icons, and a complex file system onto a tiny mobile screen. Microsoft assumed American users wanted their pocket computer to look and function exactly like their desktop PC. Palm knew they just wanted it to be fast. When consumers walked into a Best Buy or a CompUSA, they were faced with a stark choice. On one side of the aisle were Microsoft-powered pocket PCs, manufactured by hardware giants like Casio and Compaq. They boasted heavy color screens and tiny versions of Microsoft Word, but they were expensive, prone to crashing, and drained their batteries in a matter of hours. On the other side was Palm. It was monochrome. It lacked a familiar desktop interface, but it turned on instantly and lasted for weeks on a single charge. The American consumer, historically obsessed with computing power and hardware specifications, overwhelmingly chose simplicity. By the turn of the millennium, Palm captured nearly 3/4 of the entire domestic PDA market. The platform's gravity became so strong that it triggered massive network effects. The economic pattern where a product becomes increasingly valuable simply because more people use it. Because everyone owned a Palm device, a sprawling shadow economy of hardware manufacturers scrambled to build physical accessories for it. The most famous was the Targus Stowaway. It was an intricate aluminum keyboard that folded up into a block the exact size of a palm thieves. Picture an American business traveler on an Amtrak train heading down the Northeast Corridor. Instead of unpacking a heavy, hot, 8-pound laptop with a 2-hour battery life, they simply set up the Stowaway on the folding tray table, snapped the Palm into the center dock, and rapidly touch-typed a corporate memo. It was a vision of mobile computing that felt years ahead of its time, proving that a pocket device could temporarily replace a desktop machine. The device even created new social rituals. Every PalmPilot included an infrared port at the top of the casing. If two executives met in a Dallas conference room or two tech enthusiasts met at a Silicon Valley mixer, they no longer needed to exchange paper business cards. They simply pointed the tops of their devices at each other, pressed a button, and beamed their contact files through the air. In an era before Wi-Fi or Bluetooth became household terms, watching two pieces of metal and glass silently trade information across a physical gap felt like absolute magic. It was not just corporate America that bought in. On college campuses, students were downloading third-party software that turned their Palm devices into graphing calculators, universal TV remote controls, and early digital book readers. A user could download a novel from the internet, transfer it via the hot sink cradle, and read it in a dark dorm room using the device's soft green backlight. The screen was small, but the ecosystem was infinite. In March 2000, Palm was spun off from its parent company, 3Com, into an independent, publicly traded corporation. On its first day of trading, the stock market valued Palm at over $50 billion. For a brief historical moment, a company making digital pocket calendars was worth more than General Motors or Chevron. It was the absolute peak of the American tech boom, a financial validation that the future of computing was no longer tied to a desk. Palm had won the war for the pocket. They had built an ecosystem of millions of loyal users, thousands of dedicated developers, and a hardware design that was universally praised. They had trained America to digitize its daily life. But this monumental success was built on a specific, fragile assumption about how technology worked. The entire Palm ecosystem relied on the device being an offline satellite. It gathered data in the real world, but it still had to return to the beige desktop tower, sit in its plastic cradle, and physically connect to a hard drive to permanently save that data. The world was about to change. The internet was moving from the dial-up modem into the air, and the American pocket was about to become permanently connected to cellular networks. The Palm 5 was an undisputed masterpiece of hardware, but hardware alone could not survive what was waiting on the carrier shelves. The collapse of the Palm empire did not begin with a dramatic bankruptcy or the launch of a revolutionary competitor. It began with a quiet, structural fracture in 1999, the year before the company went public. Jeff Hawkins and Donna Dubinsky, the visionary architects who had willed the PalmPilot into existence, were increasingly frustrated. Palm was owned by 3Com, a massive networking hardware corporation that viewed the pocket computer as a lucrative side project rather than the center of a new computing paradigm. 3Com was slow, bureaucratic, and hesitant to license the Palm operating system to other manufacturers. In a move of stunning dissonance, Hawkins and Dubinsky resigned from the most successful handheld computer company in America, the company they built. They walked out the door and immediately founded Handspring, a rival hardware startup. Handspring licensed the Palm OS and began building cheaper, faster, and more modular pocket computers. Palm had just lost its founding soul. For a few years, the American consumer did not notice the corporate chaos, but internally, the fracture split the ecosystem. In 2001, attempting to satisfy financial markets and streamline operations, Palm executed a catastrophic corporate maneuver. They split themselves into two entirely separate companies, Palm Own, which manufactured the physical hardware, and Palm Source, which wrote and maintained the operating system. Apple and Microsoft were spending billions to tightly integrate hardware and software into a single, seamless experience. Palm had just divorced them. The immediate consequence of this division was a failure to adapt to a changing American market. Over at Handspring, Hawkins recognized that carrying a mobile phone in one pocket and a PDA in the other was highly inefficient. In 2002, Handspring introduced the Treo, a device that combined the Palm software ecosystem with a cellular modem and a physical keyboard. It was a brilliant piece of hardware, and in 2003, Palm bought Handspring to bring its founders back home and reclaim the smartphone category. But the Treo introduced Palm to a brutal new reality of the American tech market. Force 2: retail, distribution, defaults, and platform access. In 1999, Palm sold its devices in clean, colorful boxes stacked on the shelves of CompUSA, Circuit City, or Best Buy. The customer made a direct, independent choice, bought the hardware, and walked out. But to sell a smartphone in the mid-2000s, Palm had to navigate the carrier shelf, the highly controlled retail space inside an AT&T, Sprint, or Verizon store. Carriers did not care about Palm's elegant hardware vision or its developer ecosystem. They cared entirely about network lock-in and monthly subscriber fees. They forced Palm to design slightly different versions of the Treo for different cellular networks, fragmenting the hardware line. They delayed crucial software updates for months to run their own internal network tests. They demanded their own corporate logos be printed directly onto Palm's hardware. Palm was no longer an independent technology pioneer shaping the market. It had become a hardware vendor subservient to American telecommunications giants. While Palm was fighting for shelf space in carrier stores, the very foundation of its empire was rotting. The original Palm OS was a brilliant piece of code, but it was fundamentally designed for an offline, disconnected world. It was a single-tasking operating system. If an American user was looking at their calendar, the calendar was the only program running. If they opened a memo, the calendar closed. But the new mobile internet demanded multitasking. An American business user expected to receive a phone call, download an email in the background, and look at their schedule simultaneously. When Palm Source's engineers tried to force the ancient 1996 code to handle live cellular data and background internet tasks, the system buckled. Devices began to freeze. The seamless, instant experience that had made the Palm V a masterpiece was replaced by a screen that required the user to physically pull the battery out of the back of the phone to restart the machine. The legendary reliability was gone. This instability opened the door for a quiet, lethal competitor in the corporate sector, BlackBerry. While Palm required users to actively push a button on a screen or press a physical sync cable to check for new messages, BlackBerry offered secure push email, a system that delivered messages instantly over cellular networks without any user action. American IT departments loved BlackBerry's security. By comparison, Palm's reliance on the old hot sync cradle began to feel archaic. The slow death of the operating system triggered the devastating momentum of Force 3. Network effects, ecosystems, and developer support. The thousands of independent developers who had built the medical dictionaries, the real estate databases, and the early mobile games were now trying to write modern, internet-connected apps. But Palm Source repeatedly failed to deliver a modern, multitasking version of the operating system. Years passed with promised updates constantly delayed. The code was simply too old to support the future. Frustrated by the aging software and the fragmented hardware, the massive developer ecosystem, the very thing that made Palm a platform rather than just a plastic gadget, began to quietly pack up and leave. They stopped updating their apps. They looked for new platforms that actually supported the mobile internet. The hardware was still on the carrier shelf, but the digital city inside the screen was beginning to empty out. While Palm struggled with the carrier shelves and a dying operating system, the concept of the American pocket computer was violently rewritten. On January 9, 2007, Apple introduced the iPhone. The iPhone did not just combine a phone, an internet browser, and a music player. It completely destroyed the physical foundation that Palm had built its empire upon. For a decade, the American professional had interacted with their pocket screen using a plastic stick. Apple introduced the capacitive touchscreen, a glass display that sensed the electrical properties of a bare human finger, rather than relying on physical pressure from a stylus. Suddenly, the Palm interface, with its tiny scroll bars and microscopic graffiti writing squares, looked like an artifact from another century. Initially, Palm's leadership was defiant. Ed Colligan, who was leading the company, famously dismissed the threat, arguing that PC manufacturers could not simply walk into the complex cellular market and figure it out. But Apple did not just figure it out. They bypassed the traditional rules of the carrier shelf. Apple forced AT&T to give them total control over the software, refusing to allow carrier logos or pre-installed bloatware on the device. Apple had achieved the platform independence that Palm had surrendered years earlier. Realizing the old Palm OS was a dead end, the company launched a desperate, brilliant final counterattack. In 2009, Palm unveiled the Pre, a beautiful, pebble-shaped smartphone running an entirely new operating system built from scratch, WebOS. From a purely software engineering perspective, our software ain't Pre, WebOS was a masterpiece. It introduced card-based multitasking, a visual software system where running programs were represented as a deck of physical cards on the screen. If an American user was reading an email, checking a calendar, and listening to music, they did not have to dig through menus to switch between them. They simply swiped left or right to view the open cards. If they wanted to close a program, they just flicked the card upward, and it vanished off the top of the screen. It was fluid, intuitive, and felt distinctly like the future. But WebOS arrived exactly 1 year too late. By 2009, Apple had launched the App Store, and Google had introduced Android. The American mobile market had already locked in. Palm was now trapped by Force 3, network effects, ecosystems, and developer support. The developers who had once eagerly written medical dictionaries and financial calculators for the Pilot 1000 were now building empires on iOS and Android. Recoding an app for WebOS, a brand new platform with a tiny fraction of the user base, was an economic risk no sane developer was willing to take. Without the apps, consumers would not buy the phone. Without consumers, developers would not write the apps. Furthermore, Palm's retail strategy failed. They launched the Pre as an exclusive on the Sprint network. If a loyal Palm user was locked into a 2-year contract with Verizon or AT&T, they simply could not buy the device. Palm had built a beautiful digital house, but they had placed it on an American carrier shelf that too few people could reach. By 2010, the company was financially exhausted. In a final corporate maneuver, Palm sold itself to Hewlett-Packard for $1.2 billion. HP did not care about the hardware. They wanted the WebOS software to power a new generation of tablets and printers to compete with the newly released Apple iPad. In the summer of 2011, the HP touchpad launched across American big-box electronics stores. It was heavy. It lacked a meaningful app ecosystem, and it was priced identically to the iPad. Consumers ignored it. Retailers like Best Buy quickly accumulated massive piles of unsold inventory in their back rooms. Just 49 days after the touchpad launched, HP panicked. In a massive corporate retreat, they abruptly announced they were shutting down all WebOS hardware operations. The devices were marked down to $99 in a desperate fire sale, drawing massive crowds of Americans looking for a cheap gadget. It was the final humiliating chapter for the pioneer of the pocket screen. The brand that had taught America to trust the digital future had been reduced to a clearance bin curiosity. The ecosystem had completely broken down. The shelf changed. The system broke. The users moved. The developers followed. The hardware died. The logo remained. The habit was gone. After the humiliation of the clearance bins, the Palm empire was systematically dismantled for parts. Hewlett-Packard, realizing they had spent over $1 billion on a mobile operating system they no longer had the hardware to support, essentially abandoned the platform. They open-sourced components of WebOS and eventually sold the core technology to LG Electronics. Today, the ghost of WebOS lives on in a bizarre afterlife. It does not run in American pockets. It powers millions of LG smart televisions in American living rooms. The elegant interface designed to defeat the iPhone was relegated to switching between streaming apps on a flat-screen TV. The Palm trademark itself suffered the ultimate indignity of brand dilution. The name was purchased by a Chinese manufacturing conglomerate, TCL, which briefly resurrected the brand in 2018 for a tiny, fragile companion phone. It was marketed as a secondary device to help people disconnect from their main smartphones. It was Palm in name only, completely stripped of the original company's engineering philosophy, its dedicated developer ecosystem, and its market gravity. The empire was officially gone, reduced to a licensed logo printed on generic hardware. But the original hardware refuses to die entirely. Across the United States, a dedicated subculture of vintage computing enthusiasts and digital archivists actively preserves the Palm ecosystem. On internet forums and platforms like the Internet Archive, communities maintain massive digital libraries, like PalmDB, hosting thousands of abandoned software files. They are ensuring that the early medical dictionaries like Hippocrates, the offline readers, the financial calculators, and the monochrome commuter games are not lost to digital decay. In basement workshops and garage workbenches across America, collectors carefully pry open the sealed aluminum shells of the Palm 5. They use soldering irons to replace dead, decades-old lithium-ion batteries, reviving the hardware to its original factory state. They do not do this for practical daily use. They do it to preserve a physical record of the early mobile era. When a collector boots up a restored PalmPilot, they are not just looking at old software. They are interacting with a lost philosophy of computing. Writing in the graffiti alphabet on a monochrome screen offers a tactile focus that the modern smartphone, with its endless notifications and infinite feeds, completely destroyed. It is a portal to an era when a computer was a tool you put away when you were done using it. This preservation effort passes the ultimate test of tech history. Palm does not matter merely because of nostalgia. It matters because the fundamental mechanics of the modern mobile internet were prototyped on its screens. When a modern American smartphone user opens their device to switch between a banking application and a text message, they perform a specific physical gesture. They swipe up from the bottom of the glass, revealing a horizontal carousel of running applications, represented as floating cards. When they are finished, they swipe that card upward to close it. That exact gesture, that exact visual metaphor of the card deck, was not invented by Apple in Cupertino, and it was not invented by Google in Mountain View. It was invented by the WebOS design team in Sunnyvale. It took Apple and Google years to fully adopt this interaction model. Every time a user swipes a card off a glass screen today, they are executing a piece of Palm's software legacy. The company lost the corporate war, but their interface philosophy quietly conquered the world. The tragedy of Palm is the tragedy of being too early. Jeff Hawkins and Donna Dubinsky correctly predicted that the future of American computing would not sit on a heavy desk. They understood that the most valuable real estate in the entire technology industry was the shirt pocket, long before the cellular networks were truly ready for it. But building the right hardware is only the first step. The American tech market requires more than just a beautiful device. It requires a relentless defense of the ecosystem around it. Palm built the digital room, but they allowed others to control the doors. By separating their hardware and software divisions in a misguided attempt to please financial markets, they broke their own engineering momentum. By failing to rewrite their operating system for the cellular internet, they abandoned their loyal developers. And by surrendering their distribution entirely to the American carrier shelves, they lost their direct relationship with the consumer. The pioneer of the pocket computer was ultimately displaced by companies that understood the pocket was no longer just a digital notepad. It had become a permanent, always-on portal to the internet. The hot sink cradle no longer sits on the office desk. The boxed software has vanished from the retail aisles. Somewhere in an American desk drawer, an aluminum Palm 5 rests in the dark. The monochrome screen is permanently silent, the battery is dead, and the plastic stylus remains firmly locked in its metal silo, waiting for an era of computing that will never return. See you in the next video.